today. Wow, just thus far we've been studying the book of James and just delving into it. There's so much just amazing truths that just impact our hearts and have impacted my heart as I've been studying this. The title, I've had different titles, but the title for this morning's message focuses on the peril of playing God. Or playing with God, basically. Of testing God, the perils of this kind of thing. And the Bible warns us against this and says, we are not to play God. And there is great peril in that. Oftentimes as Christians, we kind of test God and we're like, has God really said that? But God does not enjoy it when we do that. So for example, in the Old Testament, you'll see an example of someone who was testing God, and God's wrath came against that individual because there's peril of playing God, and thousands of people died. In fact, Korah, in the time of Moses and his men the earth broke open and they fell into Hades. And so you'll remember for 40 days and 40 nights, there was much that went on. And so God warns his believers, do not play God. Do not tempt the Lord your God. God does not allow his followers to tempt him. And so James chapter 4, verses 11 through 17, help us to more understand this in more depth. The word tempt is this idea really of testing. The word tempt in English, it correlates, the original language correlates with this idea of testing God. And so in an effort to just go in a little bit more depth, there's two different categories of this as I've been reading. There's this idea of playing God with others. So in your interactions with other people, do not act as if you are God. And James goes into depth, explain this. And he says, evil speaking, backbiting, slander, gossip. These are examples of playing God with others. Over-controlling people's lives. Putting people's character assassination, putting others down. And James warns us against this. So there's going to be a little difference, though. He's not forbidding talking about others or making judgments, but we'll understand more about why. So the facts, the truth of God focuses on a right attitude. Slander and gossip are generally false. And we're deciding what's right. We're the ones who are creating the rules. We're the ones who are jealous oftentimes and trying to slander someone. And so James expands on this and about making our own rules and about how jealousy is often the heart of that. Additionally, we can play God with ourselves. So James tells us how critical it is that we analyze ourselves. And so he talks about pride, egotism, arrogance, and this idea of I can do whatever I want, when I want, what I want, whenever I want, where I want to do it. I can do it. And this is a very selfish, arrogant way of thinking. Additionally, James talks about an overconfidence in tomorrow. Next year I'm going to do this. Tomorrow we're going to do this. Not foreplanning, but forethought. But a person deciding, yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and do this. And so we're going to go a little bit more in depth. And there's also a reminder that life is short. People think, in 30 years, but maybe you only have 5 years left to live. You don't know. You cannot predict the future. So he emphasizes that it's important, we say, if it's what the Lord wills, to live, if it's good for me, if it's good for his cause, for God's reasoning, for this thing to happen. Additionally, he talks about the sins of omission. So there are two different ways, and they are very, very important for us to understand this morning. There are two different ways that we play God. One is with others, and then one is with ourselves. So I'm going to focus on what James talks this morning about the importance of, first of all, I'm going to expand on playing God with others. And this is dangerous. When we play God with others, it is very, very dangerous. And James expands on how it is dangerous. And so maybe you're like, wait, how do we play God with others? And James explains about that. So he says, he uses this word, slander. So I'm going to expand on what the word slander means. And then he also talks about slander. And then another thing, he talks about speaking against his brother. Your brother or sister in Christ. So James is warning anyone speaking against a brother, a fellow Christian. And that is what slander is. He's not focused on talking about the world. He's focused on us as brothers and sisters in Christ, the family of God, slandering one another. That's what he's focused on. The word literally means to speak down, to make someone feel worthless. To offend someone with communication and make them feel worthless. So Christians in this, he's telling them, do not use your language to tear down one another. He's warning them. So in Webster's dictionary, it talks about slander, and it says that it is an utterance of defamatory statements that are injurious to the reputation and well-being of a person, or a malicious statement or report. This report is intended to destroy a person's reputation. So we're both Christians, and I start speaking bad about that person. So for 34 years as a Christian, people have put my name down. They have tried to destroy my reputation. People have gossiped against me. And this happens over and over and over again. And there are many false things. All of these are examples of slander. An example, someone reminded me of going to the store, meeting a stranger and saying, "Hey," and they're like, "Hey, Chester Brock," or someone says, "Hey, I go to Chester Brock's church," and the person goes, "Oh, Chester Brock, that's a cult. That is a bad church," and they've heard like that I have false teaching. And have you experienced that? The deaf community has a lot spread around town about us like that. And even Christians. And so James is warning, hey, don't be slandering one another. I've been through a lot, and so now when someone says something, I don't really pay attention to it because it's something I've gotten so used to hearing. Before, I would start crying and I would feel so sad and discouraged, but as I've been able to move on from that as a more mature person and, recognize that I have enemies. And enemies who are even calling themselves Christian, and this is just a shame. The world can go ahead and mock. That's okay. But other people who call themselves Christians, my friends, my brothers and sisters in Christ, coming against me, trying to tarnish my name? This bothers me. And this is an example of slander, to defame someone, to communicate in a malicious way with intent to tarnish a person's reputation. And it's damaging. So James goes on to say, anyone who speaks against his brother or judges him, without proof. It's like this idea of, oh, I heard about that. And maybe you're not sure. Maybe it's a false story. Maybe something's been twisted. So then the question becomes, people are slandering, people are judging, people are always turning up against one another. Why is that happening in the church? What's going on here? Why are Christians doing that? And you'll remember that in the past there was more unity. Christians were more united. But today, these days, it seems like there's so many divisions. And people are against other people. And people are saying, hey, I'm a brother and sister in Christ. And then people start getting against one another. And this happens more and more. This idea of Christians slandering one another. So the question becomes, why is this happening? The answer says, anyone who speaks against his brother or judges him speaks against the law and judges it. So we'll go ahead and focus on the law in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. It says, do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against one of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. I am Yahweh. So this is what was written in Leviticus. Don't be against one another. Do not bear a grudge. Love your neighbor as yourself. Here this is in the Old Testament. Jesus wasn't teaching some new teaching. James wasn't teaching something new. This was something that God had already established. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love the Lord. Furthermore, you remember what Jesus said. Love the Lord your God with all your mind, with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. This is what Jesus taught. Love your neighbor like you love yourself. This law of love. So without love, remember how it talks about you will be cold without love. It'll be worthless. Everything you do is worthless without love. It has no impact. So love doesn't degrade one's neighbor. Love doesn't tear down brothers and sisters in Christ. So he reminds them that when you judge the law, you are not keeping the law. You are not loving your neighbor as yourself. You're not loving God with your heart, mind, soul, and strength. This has been God's law forever, and you are not following God's law. There were people that came to Jesus and they said, what is the greatest commandment? And Jesus said, love God and love your neighbor. This is the law that God has established. This is the law of Christ. Love your neighbor. When you judge the law, you are not keeping it, but sitting in judgment on it. It's this idea of, oh, there's the law, love God, love your neighbor, but I'm against my neighbor. I'm judging my neighbor. And so I am putting myself up as higher than the law, than God's law that he has established. Wow. This is a terrible mistake. We are not to take on the authority of judging people like God does.
So it's interesting that when we see here God is above, he is supreme. God is above the law, but God shows his love and has shown his love through the law. And then the picture below, the smiley face, is meant to be us. So if we sit in judgment against the law, what we are doing, in essence, is putting our own selves above God by passing judgment. We are making him less important. We are making ourselves supreme over God when we judge. And we are not to do that. We are not put ourselves above the law. We are under the law. We are subject to the law. We are not to go against the law. We are not to make ourselves greater than God. This is a warning against this activity for us. And this is one of the most quoted verses today. It says, "Judge not, lest that ye be judged." People say, "You can't judge me." No, but if you go ahead and judge, you have to understand the meaning that you too will be judged. And it's very important here. Jesus was speaking about not doing this. He was speaking about not insulting people, not slandering people, not going against them, not defaming their character. This was included. This was a part of the law, and it was part of the authority of the law. We are to let God be the judge. Oh, he alone has the authority to do this. So when we speak about judgment, when we think about judging ourselves or judging other people, it's a terrible thing for a Christian to do, to always be looking at people with this feeling of betterment. And it speaks to our attitude and our character as well. When people say, "Oh my gosh, look at him, he's not right, he's false. Born again, I don't believe that one," and all of these different things that we build up against people. That's judgment. That's judgment against them. And it can become very, very complicated. This Greek word here that we have, speaking of judgment, means a separation, meaning I separate myself, the two different groups. And let me see if I can go on and show this a little bit more clearly. So I have, this great big whiteboardish kind of thing. So we will see about the separation. Separation between good and bad. We have that, we know this. But let us look at this. So we have the white side and we have the black side. Right? You can see that clearly. And people say, "Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah, the white, the black, the judging, all of this stuff. I got it. But what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to separate the two, not leave them side by side, but to separate the two, because the judgment, of course, goes with to see what is good, to see what is bad. So you're seeing the difference between the two. And this can also be applied to right and wrong. Because with judgment, we have to separate these. Without judgment, we can't. We have to know the difference between right and wrong. So we see this separation. When people take up the job of judging, then they themselves are judging right from wrong. And how do we know? How do we know? And Christ teaches us this. Saying to judge ourselves, but not to judge others. Those are two different things. People who want to do that, it is possible to understand this idea of judgment, but we also must look to the character of the person. A person who could be perfect, could possibly be the judge. But looking at this word, to continue on with the Greek word, it's like looking into, investigating into, before you throw mud at somebody, before you start slinging mudslingers, you have to know if something is true, or is it really false. You can't just, without any analysis at all, just start thinking and going and saying, "Oh, you have to have proof. You have to have evidence of what's going on," instead of just saying, you see somebody talking about something, just talking about it and giving that information. You just don't go with that all on itself. Or gossip, for example, it's the same thing. It's like you can't just go by gossip. You have to go by what you see, by what activity is actually going on, and that is how you judge right from wrong. So it requires investigation to do this. And then another very important or critical point is often, Jesus taught that there were also two things about answers, a yes-no answer. Now, God himself never vacillates over how he's going to answer. God is directed very clear to us with his yes and with his no. He doesn't negotiate, doesn't sit on the fence or anything. These are separate. Totally and completely separate. One answer is a yes, one is a no. Clear as can possibly be. When you go to court and, they start asking you questions, you're on the witness stand, and the questions that they ask, should be yeses or nos. So they don't want they don't want you to go on and on about something and blather on. They want it simple. They want a yes or a no. And that's how God responds to us. Not any discussion or anything. It's very, very clear. And we are to accept the word of God. Not to try to change it, not to try to fix it, not to try to twist it and make it so that it becomes a yes. Especially, if the answer was no. You can't do that. And our answers as well. A yes should be yes and a no should be no. And not to try to go over that. So when we look at this, again, this is very critical that we know that there's a separation between these two. And so we see these Greek words. We see the second one that's done in red. It's gone through, judge, and discerning. So discerning between what is right and what is wrong. Not going in the middle, but to try to analyze the situation. Look at them both clearly. And that is extremely critical when you do these things. Because God will then give you truth and wisdom. Whereas people will try to trap you and trick you into all of these things. But you'll be able to recognize what is true and what is a lie. Because we have a great gift of discernment from God. And then also, all of this must be done before one judges. Before one judges, one does not want to be prejudiced. So, nowadays we have, so many problems, we're having racial issues, with black and white, and, wait to see, who's been caught because of their skin color, shoot somebody because of racism, because the color of their skin is different and what they see. And there's a lot of that going on in the world today, and you see people putting down other people because of that. And the homeless as well, when you see people who are like laying on the sidewalks or whatever. And sometimes, get them up, maybe treat them to McDonald's or, help them. And the manager is like, get out of here, I paid for their food. And he says, no, I don't want them because of the way they look, or, they're homeless, get them out of here. Don't take them in here. Don't bring them into my establishment. And the reason for this is prejudice. And it is causing a great problem in America nowadays. What people prefer, what they most prefer in skin color and what people look like. So we see here this difference. If you go from right or from wrong, we have to be careful when judging between these two. And it's another one too, a comparison. We know that Jesus often had parables. He was saying that we are not to judge. And you can take one line from something that Jesus has said as opposed to the entire story. But remember, when he was speaking of a tree that bears good fruit and a tree that bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit. And he wanted us to know this really, really clearly. He wanted to speak very clearly about this, about fruit, about the good fruit, the right fruit, the wrong fruit. And this was the comparison that Jesus was making back in his time when he told the parables that he did. And then somebody who decides to make these decisions themselves and deny people or put people down or defame them or whatever, whenever that they put somebody down. It's very important that you understand the foundation of your decision. And it's also very important to look at oneself. You know, you can point the finger at somebody else, but look at all the fingers that are pointing back at yourself. You point one finger out at someone, look, you can see it here on my hand as this example, that really I should be examining myself. I should be looking at what's wrong in myself instead of saying, oh, look at that, look at how he does his thing. Oh no, we are to look within ourselves, analyze ourselves, study to see what is it about us. Do we measure up? Do we show love? Will we show love as Jesus showed love? And remember, he said, you know, before you go to take the speck out of your brother's eye, remove the plank from your own. Because what he's saying, you know, was speaking to, was taking the beam out of your own eye, even though your neighbor or your brother has like a speck. So what he was saying is understand and know yourself clearly before you point fingers or go to judge someone else. Before you confront somebody about something, confront yourself. Look at yourself. In 2 Corinthians it says that you must first analyze yourself. See what is inside of you. You must first look into yourselves, look into your heart. See what is in yourself. See that there is no wrong within you. For you cannot judge another. If you don't know what's right and what's wrong before you confront someone, then you must confront them in love. Love covers a multitude of sins. And remember how I said that, you know, people that insult me nowadays, it just turns away from me. I just let it slide off my back. The point, too, that we are making, God expects us to judge. But we need to investigate. We need to answer. We need to discern. We need to compare. We need to self-examine. We need to judge ourselves first. And as we see here, God prohibits condemning. God prohibits this condemnation of people. You know, when Jesus walked the earth, so for example, sometimes a leader is caught in doing something in fornication. Remember the woman who broke the law, and because she was a sinner, she committed adultery, and then Jesus said, you know, the people came and they picked up the stones and they were ready to kill her by stoning. And Jesus said, that is fine, but look amongst yourself, and whoever is perfect and without sin, let him cast the first stone, because that would support the law, you know, that if you were yourself. And then Jesus got down on his knees and was writing in the sand, and what happened was all of those men that had condemned this woman, they all looked within themselves, and they all dropped their stones and they all left. And then Jesus looked up and everybody was gone, and there was just a woman standing there. There was no one left to go against her. Jesus knew their hearts. He knew that all of them had sinned just as well. And Jesus himself could have cast a stone, but he didn't. You know, he was the only one that had never committed sin. He was the only one that was pure. So it's like by usurping God's role, we act as if we are God, that we can pass judgment. You know, it's like saying, oh, God, get off the throne. You know, I need some space here. And then sitting on the throne, and then we point our fingers and we condemn people. We are elevating ourselves above God's authority, and that is not to be done. it says that there is only one. There is but one lawgiver, one judge. And it's clear who it is, that it is God. He is the only one who can judge over all. It says in the Bible that the Father gives the judgment to Jesus, who takes it up. And then Jesus will be the judge. But he has given this authority from the Father to judge. And the Father is the only one that can. For he is the only one who is able to save and to destroy. He is supreme above all. So now it's also important that when we point our finger at someone, we are acting egotistically. It says, but you, who are you to judge your neighbor? Who is to come in front of you for judgment? Are you above God? And this is the warning that we are being given. That this is an ego thing. That we think that we are so much better, that we can put other people down, that we can make ourselves equal to God. So he's been talking about playing God with ourselves. He's been talking about playing God with others, but now we focus on ourselves to see what we are doing. That we ourselves are not following God. And we're going to look into James in chapter 4, verse 13 through 17. It says, when we think that we are in control. You know, we're better. We're perfect. Everything else is worthless. We're in charge. We got it. Saying that we're better. That we're not wrong. And that attitude, that is a totally wrong attitude to have. So I was saying, listen, all of you who say, today or tomorrow, in a few days, we're gonna go to this city, or maybe we'll go to that city, and maybe we'll spend a year there, buy a house, live in a house. Okay. We don't know about today or tomorrow, and when we say this, we're saying that we are in control of time. We are master of our own time. We're thinking that we'll never pass. Like you could be in traffic and you could be in a car accident. Somebody will say, I'll promise I'll be there too. And then, maybe you get stuck in traffic, you can't go anywhere, you can't flat tire, you have to get off, plans just go awry. So it's important that, or perhaps you have an important interview that you want to go to and you're thinking, great, gotta get there exactly at the right time, he's gonna see that I show up on time, he's gonna see that I'm punctual, this is really, really good. Maybe you oversleep and you wake up and you think, oh, jeez, the appointment, I'm not ready, I haven't gotten ready, oh my gosh, I haven't brushed my teeth, I gotta get all of this done, get on the car, you're like zooming out of the driveway, taking off and just going, watching the time, oh my gosh, the time is just passing, it's going so fast, and you get this idea, this vision, oh my gosh, he's not gonna like me, he's gonna think, oh my gosh, this is just terrible, and you get there late, like really, really late. It's like your butterflies in your stomach, and you go in, and he says, hey, kind of late, weren't you? You say, oh gosh, I had so much traffic. I didn't expect. And you lie to him, and you're not truthful, and you're all of these things. And he's like, oh, really? Huh? It's funny. No parking? Huh? And he's going to think, you can't arrive on time, that maybe you don't need the job.
when we do this, we're setting ourselves up as the master of our world. A person who says, today or tomorrow, we're going to go into this city or that city and spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. For example, oh yeah, we're going to have a business, we're going to do this. And then sometimes no one comes to the store, or 1 or 2 or 3 people come in all day. And so this idea of a successful business with tons of people crowding their way in doesn't always come to fruition. Sometimes people think, I'm going to be success. I have a master's degree or a PhD. I'm guaranteed success. I'm guaranteed a job. But many times, people go to Gallaudet University and they get their degree and they go to real life and to reality and they're looking and looking and looking and it's hard to find a job. They have this degree. It's posted on the wall. I have my degree, whatever it's called, but it's hard to find an actual job, and sometimes they're like, can I work at McDonald's? And they're making $13, $14 an hour, flipping hamburgers. I've seen it happen to many, many individuals where they're working as a janitor. Their goal was to become a teacher to get their certification, but then that doesn't pan out, and they end up becoming a janitor. This idea of knowing that we're going to be successful, really though, James is emphasizing the futility of playing God, of setting ourselves up as God. I know what's best. We fool ourselves when we do this. James emphasizes why you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. You do not know the future. God alone knows your future. He goes on to say, what is your life? Yesterday, I went to a birthday party for a friend who is 70. And it's like, wow, I was just in my 30s and 40s, but now 70? A deaf man up to the north, in his 30s and 20s. He had all these plans. But now, here he is, 70 years old. Where did the time go? It happened in just the briefest instant. Life is short. Marriage, children, and then you get old. And you're like, what? I felt like that was yesterday. In the blink of an eye, your life goes before you. He says, you are a mist. The King James says, you are a vapor. It's like when you're cooking, when you're boiling water, and there's a water vapor. When the water boils, it comes up and then it vanishes. Your life is like that. 30, 40 years in the future, that's a vapor. You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. He's like, you're just this little tiny dot. But then you're over. Vapor can only be seen for a short time and then it vanishes. I've asked many people in their 80s and even in their 90s, do you feel like your life has been long or short? You know, in high school, I couldn't wait to get done. I couldn't wait to graduate. I couldn't wait to get out in the world. I was in just such a hurry. Then I couldn't wait to graduate. Oh, now I'm here. Graduation was 43 years ago. Life today is precious. Cherish it. In verse 15, he talks about our presumption is futile. Instead, we ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that, or die, or get married, or buy a house. We're to rely on God's will. This phrase, Lord willing, what God wants. He is the one who decides. He's the one that has the final say in our lives. He is the one. He is the one who guides you. God is the one who guides your life. Him and Him alone, always. Sometimes we have dreams. We have goals. You know, we plant seeds, and oftentimes God does work things out in our life. As Jen signed in the song, God comes in and He changes our lives. He will hold us fast. Jesus alone. It's important that if you think of, oh, my future business, you need to remember, if it is the Lord's will, we'll do this or that. And if it's not His will, we can't just decide, I will do this, because then we'll be frustrated. When our dreams, like a pin popping a balloon, are smashed before our eyes, if it's God's will, we'll find the job. We'll have a successful business. Our dreams will succeed. Our plans will come to fruition. But we have to remember, if it's the Lord's will, we shouldn't be focused on, I'm going to make it happen. That's not God's way. So our president, Trump, he has all these dreams and ideas, but his plans often are frustrated. He thinks he can do it. He thinks he can change America. Make America great again? Is America great? This dream. But God is the one who wills. God can stop or allow Trump's plans to come to fruition. And as Christians, we must remember to rely on God. Our dreams, we don't know if we're going to be living. We don't have a 100% guarantee of that. I'm wondering, am I going to make it through to 100, to 90? But I realize, if it's the Lord's will, or if my life is shortened. Do you remember Jesus Christ? He only lived for 33 years. And He died at 33. And you think, oh, I beat Jesus because I lived longer? Imagine. Some people live to be 90 or 100 years old. President Carter, how old was he? 96? 98? 99? They did an interview with him. They did an interview with someone who's 102 years old. The president came to this person for teaching, for example. But this man was a very humble man. He was willing to give his life to do the Lord's will. Verse 16 goes on to say, our pride is futile. As it is, you boast and brag. All such boasting is evil. It's foolish. Thinking, I got it. Everything I'm going to do. Boasting is evil. In verse 17, also, he talks about our omission is futile. So anyone then, who knows the good he ought to do and doesn't do it, sins. This person rebels against God. And so James emphasizes that if you know what is right and you don't do it, you are in sin. He talked about being a doer of the word, not just a hearer only. And that's why I've been emphasizing, as we've been studying the book of James, it is critical that we are to do it. Because if we do not, we are in sin. We have broken God's law. In conclusion this morning, I want to emphasize the dangers of playing God in our own lives and also in the lives of others by maligning them or putting down someone's name. Thinking, I'm perfect, I got everything, I got the smarts. This is foolish. We do not. We need to say, God, if it's your will, because time runs short. In Luke, once again, there's an emphasis of this. Jesus said in Luke chapter 12, verse 14, he said, a story of a man, he said, there was this man. And so Jesus said, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions, what he has, his financial resources, his home, his land, his property, all of these things. Your life doesn't consist in the abundance of possessions. Jesus goes on to say, the ground of a certain rich man produced a great crop. So the man said to himself, what should I do after he gathered in this crop? He's like, wow, my barns are full. I have no place to store my crop. So he decided to go ahead and build more buildings. The man said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. It's like a person buys a small house and they're like, I need a bigger house. I need a mansion. So I can keep all my possessions. And so this man tears down his barns. He's planning to tear down his barns. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, that I will store all my grains and my goods. It's kind of like storage. Oftentimes, people rent and they have like lots of storage facilities where they have lots of supplies. And people often have storage where they keep it for several years. And they're paying and paying and paying every month for this storage. But oftentimes, they cherish these things. And they're like, oh, that was my broom when I was 30 years ago. And it was so precious. And I just throw it in the trash. It's worthless. We care about so much. And we want to store it up and save it up. And people, oh, people come and look and try to get their stuff after they die. But it's really not worth a lot. And I'll say to myself, the man will say to himself, you have plenty good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. It's like all these people thinking, oh, I've got a retirement plan. I'm going to retire. I've saved up all this money. I'll be able to live off that money comfortably. You know, in America, we see that constant. People want an easy life. They want to celebrate. They want to party. But God said to him, you fool. You have all this stuff saved up. You know, you have a fire. That very night, your life will be demanded of you. Like for a person who has such great wishes and then they have a heart attack the next day. Then, who will you give and what will you have prepared for yourself? You just die. It's a waste. So Jesus says, you fool. And you know, there is some wisdom, there is some advice, but as Christians, we should be different. We should be the opposite. We don't need to store up great riches for ourselves. Who's going to get it? People are going to run, your kids, they're going to be arguing, fighting. It's mine. I get 30%, you get 30%. You know, when people pass away, it gets very ugly oftentimes with children coming together and fighting. It's tragic, and it's a shame. This happens in Christian families also. People are so focused on stuff. So in Luke chapter 12, verse 21, Jesus concludes his story talking about that rich man and says, this is how it will be with anyone who stores up rich things for himself, but is not rich towards God. God can take all that away. God isn't interested in your money or your riches or what you have, your possessions, your smarts, any of that. That isn't what's valuable to God. Now, we can recognize the importance of this. So let's stand together.